everything does sum to 100%, and the annual crops are in across seasons. Does that make sense now, Raju?
Okay, it's fine.
So if there is any clarity that's needed, that's why we have this calculator on the side. So that's one change that's come through. Thank you to the people that were the first to test it. Let me just get rid of that. The first to test it, I had made a coding error that you could only put whole numbers in. So that's fixed now. So you can use decimals if people were having that problem. That's fixed now. And that is the main changes in module 1. As we come through, that leaves us with module 2. And sorry, my screen is a bit small. I will zoom in as well. So module 2. So this is what we're really here to discuss. And again, I don't think we'll need the full 2 hours, but what we really need to do is to make sure that we understand the questions. If there's questions that don't make sense, calculations that you think don't make sense as well, that's what we want to work through here. So the first big change was that the filter was not working. Sorry, let me zoom in. The NA filter was not working before, so apologies for that. That's fixed now. So when you choose NA, everything will disappear in this version. You need to have 5. You can get to 10. On a note about how we're going to go about this, and I'll come to you shortly, Ajit. We've been in discussions with each of the regional leads about making a short list. So we're going to ask the process and technical facilitators to meet with your leads and create a short list of climate hazards before we move, and that will help inform this pre-population with the global team as well. Ajit.
Hi, Brendan. I was just wondering, were you sharing a screen or not? I had one question for the percentage calculation. May I share my screen to show you my my Excel sheet so
sure,
that you can better understand?
I'll stop sharing and then you please share.
Thank you. Sorry, I don't have access to sharing. I think you have to give me access.
Does anybody know off the top of their head where I do that? That would be in meeting options. Sorry, everybody, give me 1 second. You can present everyone, save. Okay, try, it's just updating the settings.
Okay, I can do it now. So this is my, can you see my screen?
Not yet, but it's loading. Can anybody else see Ajit's screen?
No, just a black screen.
Yeah, we're just seeing a black screen there, Ajit, sorry.
Maybe I have to reshare it again.
Ajit, you can probably share a screenshot of your Excel in the chat.
I'll try one more time and then, yeah, I don't want to take a lot of time of Brendan, sorry.
No, we're here to discuss, but unfortunately, Ajit, you're just sharing a blank black screen again.
Okay, okay. So let me.
Can you? So which module are we talking about? So I'll come back to you, Ajit, because I can't hear you at the moment. I can see Anne has put something in the chat, so I'll just read that. So in PAiCE, the total cultivated area, in 1.1, we have the 3 most widely planted crops, which are not necessarily covering 100% of the total area. Do you have to adjust the total cultivation area to match 3? So no. The idea here is that this, so in this case where we have the Eastern Gangetic Plains, the Indian example, there's round out to 30 million hectares under cultivation. In 1.1, in 1.2, you're assigning that 30 million across the different crops. So the idea here is that we need to understand the relative importance of the different crops. That's why it says, can you assign more crops when you've got a high number of crops that are not there? So remember, the idea is to frame the system. In module 2, you can exclude the crops that you don't want to analyze, but the idea here is to frame the system first so that we can understand the relative importance of different crops. Does that answer your question, Anne? If you're responding, Anne, you're on mute.
I lost my connection. Sorry for that. So we can. I will bilateral discuss with you. Sorry. Please go ahead with the rest of the training. Thanks.
Okay, sure. Otherwise, send me an email with your file, and I can open it up as well.
Okay, great.
All right. So that's a question from Anne. So
Brendan?
Yes, Rika.
Just to follow up on that question. So basically, the total area of the domain, we should include in this module 1 all the crops, even if they are not crops of interest, so that we know the 100%, right?
That is the way that it was framed to me in design with the EiA team. They wanted to frame the whole system, and then in module 2, it will basically reduce them out. So remembering that in 2.2, you can only select up to the 8 most important crops. So in really diverse systems, you can only select 8. If you have less diverse systems, it will come down. And that's where it recommends if you're less than 5% of the economic value, then just say no in that case. But the idea is that we frame the whole system and then work backwards from that in selecting the important crops. Is there any other questions in module 1? We won't have to go back through module 1 next week, as long as we're happy that we've clarified everything in module 1 now. So is there anything else in module 1 that people would like to clarify? Okay, excellent. So then what we're here to look at today is module 2. So this is around climate hazards. We'll go through each module, but just so we're clear about the latest version, we said that the NA filter wasn't working. That's working now. And there was some problems with the transfer of seasonal importance into modules 2.3 through to 2.10. So that's been fixed now. There was a little coding error where the seasons were getting mixed up, but that should be fixed now. So those are the two things. If you're seeing a file with either of those problems, it means you're not on the most up-to-date file. So let's go back to the welcome page. So this just tells us what this module is about. The important thing here, so I think it was Vijay Kumar, you were saying that the NA function wasn't working. So you wouldn't type NA over here. You would pick NA from the drop-down menu. And just so everybody's clear, if you face this problem, you can't select NA for the first 5. So the final option there is other, up to 5. And once you pass 5, then you have the option of NA. And that's because the tool needs at least 5 climate hazards to run. So you need to think of at least 5. If you're not seeing NA, it's probably because you haven't got to the 6th option yet. So we've got these categories, and they're dictated by EiA. So they're the EiA climate categories in terms of their strategic documents. So that's why we have this list, but feel free to use other if there are climate hazards in your environment that you think don't fit these. You know, you could have 4 or 5, 6, 7 others if they're the most significant climate hazard. These 2 boxes are then text. So the idea here is your hazard specifics to try and be as specific as possible and as short as possible, because as you'll see, the terms that you put in here are the ones that are transferred later in the tool. So just some observations here where we had storms and cyclones as the category, and then the hazard specifics were 1 to 2 times per year. The problem with that was that when we transferred over, it only transfers over that first bit. So we were seeing then 1 to 2 times per year, but we weren't seeing that it's storms and hazards. So make sure here, instead of 1 to 2 times per year, just reuse the term, you know, storm or cyclone once or twice per year, so that transfers over later in the tool. And these notes definitions, they stay on this page, but the idea is if there's a discussion within your workshop that's clarifying certain things that are in or out of the discussion with a particular hazard, it's more so if we need to return and clarify anything, then we've got some notes there. So those aren't transferred out. It's simply to capture what's going on in the workshop. So particularly for technical facilitators, making sure that you're grabbing the key ideas and discussion points, if you have any, around the hazard category. And then it's got a filter to say if it applies to seasons. So as I say, that's then comes in. So you'll see in this example, it's not asked for the 1st and 3rd in Rabi season. And if the filter is working correctly, it's because in Rabi, you're saying that flooding is not relevant in Rabi and the storms and cyclones are not relevant in Rabi. So this is just a filter to make filling in the later submodules easier. Does anybody have any questions or issues with 2.1 that they'd like to raise? Okay. I just got the comment from Ajit, so we can quickly go back to 1.2. So the restriction criteria here is that it's in percentage from 0 to 100. Ajit, so what number were you trying to put in, just to clarify the issue that you were having? If you're still on the call, might be having some internet difficulty.
Brendan, what I was trying to say was that when we type a number, if the percentage symbol is not provided, it won't take. So that's a small issue that you could fix later on.
Not in this version. So hang on, I'll zoom in so people can see, but you put in a number and it assumes percentage. So I can put 90 there, or I can put 5. So it is working in this version. Was that in an earlier version that you had that, or?
Yeah, maybe it's the earlier version, the version before the one you sent today morning. Yeah, if I could ask you one question here. So I got disconnected a bit, but if my understanding is right, we have to ensure that the total percentage, it should be 100% in total for a given season, right?
Correct.
And what I'm not understanding is the split. I mean, the fallow and the remaining crops. How to do the area there?
It basically is summing to 100. So not to show too much of the calculations, but basically remaining crops is 1 minus the sum of everything else.
I see.
It doesn't
So
doesn't
the
actually allow
percentage
you to
also,
type in.
the percentage also includes fallow and remaining crops, right?
Correct. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
So it will ask you for the amount of fallow because that can differ by season. Remembering that our calculation is for land that's in cultivation over the last 5 years. But there will be, this is seasonal fallow, not full fallow. And that will change. So, you know, for instance, in Nepal, you will have almost 100% cultivation in the monsoon, but in the pre-kharif season, so the pre-monsoon season, you might have even 40% fallow in certain locations. So it's seasonal fallow that comes through. What I'll do is I'll change that term from fallow to seasonal fallow to make that a little bit clearer.
Thank you.
Sorry while I write down my notes because I don't have a scribe or anything, so just give me a second. And just looking, it's actually much easier, guys. It's great to put in the chat box, but because I don't have a scribe, I'm struggling to keep up there as well. So Vijaya Kumar, do you want to turn your microphone on and speak, and then we'll go to Rika after that.
Yeah, now I am audible.
Yes.
Yeah, in 2.1 in climate hazards, we are identifying, right? In that we are having options to select whether it is in Kharif season or Rabi season. So we are selecting, suppose drought, we are giving in Rabi season, the chance of drought is more. Even if you want to give in Kharif season, we are having options to provide. That's fine. My next option is if we are going to study the impact of that particular climatic hazards on the crop, then we need to specify the stage because the drought may occur on early stage as well as on later stage. For example, if you take the rice crop, if the drought occurs in early stage, the yield loss may be lower. But if the same drought occur in flowering stage, the yield loss will be more. So we have any options here in this module to account those crop stages?
Great question. Thank you. It's and that's a very important point. And that's the idea of having the hazard category first. So so in your example, you would choose insufficient water, and then in the hazard specifics. Now, I understand when people are filling this at the moment, they're filling it with junk data. They're not thinking very hard because we're learning the tool. We're not using the outputs. So in this example, drought was the hazard specific. What I would say is when we move to actually using this tool purposefully, that would be insufficient. It would be early season dry spell or in-season dry spell or rains at harvest time, not just excessive rains. So you can use your 10 categories to split and be more specific on the hazards that you're facing rather than these generic ones. So again, I understand why it looks like this because we're learning the tool, but as we move forward, we want to be more specific within that hazard specifics. Does that answer your question, Giacomo?
Yes.
Perfect. Thank you. Rika.
So thanks, Brendan. On in Cambodia, there are farmers that are planting like a third season, which is very small kind of season, also a very small area. And normally the government data does not capture that. So we don't really have data on what the area it is for this production domain. But when I look at the hazard, climate hazard, that one is very like we should consider that one. Should we just add and say, well, we don't know exactly the area potentially like this or like it's expert guess. There's no national statistics for it. Would you say let's just consider a third crop for that?
So I would consider the economic importance of that third crop when we're talking about framing this system. If you think that the effects of climate change will have a severe impact on that third season, and that there is economic value in that third season, then I'd say to include it. So I've just put your example up here for the Cambodian Mekong River Delta. Yeah, so the question, if I understand correctly, what you're saying is, should we put 2 here or 3 here, given that the third season is a shorter and less relevant season? I'll throw it back to you and say, do you think that there is, will it be heavily impacted by climate change, and is there economic value to that third season?
So I think for specific farmers, there is economic value, but it often spills over to the next year. So it's like this is a 2.5 crop. But from the government perspective, because there are so few that have like stable water, and they can have the third crop or half crop for the rest of the year, then the government does not see it as economically important. But should we make that decision that maybe there is some economic importance for those particular farmers?
Yeah, understood. So yeah, there's 2 aspects there. You could split your seasons here and have like a wet first season and a wet second season and a dry season, where the wet second season is like the 1.5 season and the wet first is the first season. If you wanted to split it that way, it's just about making sure. Again, so we've got this calculator of hectares on the side, and it gets a bit messy when you've got crossover of seasons. So at the moment, the tool is not really designed to pick up. It could be, but the time that it would take to then calculate everything and the workshop length would extend quite a lot. So given it's a grey area, I'd be a little concerned around how you would incorporate it. It is theoretically possible, but you'd have to split those seasons. In terms of the second part of your question, which is about the data, a lot of this there is not going to be hard data on, so it is expert opinion and elicitation in terms of filling some of these numbers. For instance, gross margins in much of Africa will be really hard to put a number on. So it will be expert guess in terms of populating that data. Munza.
Yeah, hi. I had a related question to Rika's question. I guess a more procedural question on some of these things. The decision about how many seasons to include and how many crops, is that something that the facilitators should have somewhat of an agreement on beforehand, or is that something we should decide in consultation with the participants at the workshop? I mean, I believe like the question that Rika was asking, right? The experts there would probably also have an opinion on whether that's an important question to include or not, whether climate hazards affect that third season or not. So is that something we should have already decided beforehand, or is that something we leave open for the workshop itself?
So this has to be decided before the workshop, because modules 1 and 2 are done before the workshop and pre-populated. That wouldn't mean, however, that you couldn't check with your participants what they believe should be the focus. Primarily, it was envisaged that this would be decided by the regional lead and the process and technical facilitators, given that we hope that you've got a very good understanding of the system. If you, as a process facilitator, wanted to check in with your workshop participants, take a poll on how you should pre-populate, that would be fine, but it does have to be decided beforehand. Make sense?
Got it. Yeah, got it. Okay, thanks.
Raju, did you raise your hand there?
Yes. And this
Go
is
ahead.
regarding that sheet number. 1 minute. Sheet number 2.3. In this regard,
Up to 2.3 yet. So hold your question, Raju, until we get to 2.3.
Yes, 2.
So that we move.
So you are considering only probability of occurrence of climatic hazard, given hazard, up to that only?
So hold your question and we'll come to 2.3. We'll just get through 2.1 and 2.2 first.
Okay, fine.
So 2.1, I think we're okay with. So coming to 2.2. Oh, too far. 2.2 is a filter. So it basically provides you with the activities and the economic value and asks you if you want to include them or not. So one question that came from Ali, I can show you, give me 1 second. I'll put Ali's data in and we can go and look at his query. So in this case, Ali had done just rice in 2 seasons. So when he came to the filter, there was only the 2 versions. So he only sees 2.3 and 2.4 and then skips through to the results. So it really depends on the system that you work in. So if I pick, let me pick one where there is more. Yeah, so this South Asia example from Raju. Raju, where instead of seeing just those 2, you will see a larger filter. When you come to 2.2, something's happened. Hang on, give me a second. Something's gone wrong there. So in this case, you now see 5. And again, it's set so that there's a recommendation there that if it's below 5%, then you wouldn't. But if you were to want to choose that, then by all means, you can add it into your. So for instance, in this example, corn in the dry season has a comparatively low economic value as compared to the crops above it. But we might say that corn in the dry season is likely to increase in its importance in the next 10 years due to climate change or market change or anything like that. So you might want to change that to yes, even though it has a lower economic value. So it's simply a filter we've got 2.3 to 2.10. If you selected all 8, then you would come to all 8 there. So any queries around 2.2 before we move ahead? Okay, so now 2.3 to 2.10, they are all the same template. So the first one, I'll give an overview and then we can discuss. And this is the most important bit of the second module. You will notice that for each module, it is a different crop and season. So in 2.3 in this example, we have rice in the dry season. In 2.4, we have rice in the wet season. And I think we only selected 2. So if we were to put this to yes, then 2.5 would become corn in the dry season. The first element is the percentage of area impacted. Now remember, this is percentage of area for rice in the dry season. So in each of these tabs, we're talking specifically about a crop by season. So the good example here is in this 2.3, we're talking about rice in the dry season. And in 2.4, we're talking about rice in the wet season. So if we were to be really specific, when we're talking about rice in the dry season, we know that rice in the dry season is 255,000 hectares. So we are only specifically talking about that 255,000 hectare in this module. So it's the percentage of that 255,000 that is likely to be impacted by drought, temperature, and pest infestations. The second part then is how likely are each of the following outcomes? No yield impact, some, significant, or catastrophic, and we've got the yield loss that comes in there. When we're talking about this, to go to your question, Raju, this is incorporating the probability of occurrence and the probability of impact. So as an example, we're talking about over the next 10 years, we've said that 50% of the area is likely to be impacted by drought. We've said 5% no yield impact. So what that is saying is in terms of occurrence, so this is your occurrence column. This is no occurrence, and the sum of these is occurrence. It's just that we're splitting occurrence across the impact of that occurrence. So in this case, what has been filled in here is pest infestation is unlikely to be an issue, is unlikely to occur in 3 out of the next 10 years. And in 7 of the next 10 years, it is likely to occur. Those 7 years are then split across 4 years with up to 25% yield loss, 3 years of moderate yield loss, and no years of catastrophic yield loss. So it's basically saying that even if there is a horrible pest infestation, it's not going to wipe out the crop. It won't be catastrophic yield impact. So we are capturing occurrence as well as impact of occurrence. So to go back to your question, Raju, does that answer your query?
Still, I have some issues with this. Now I understood that you have considered probability of occurrence of hazard alone. So given the occurrence, probability of occurrence, and again within a crop, means it varies. It's not that crop is given for a given stress or stress magnitude, then hazard or impact will be similar. So for example, total, for example, 10% of the area is there. So in the 10% area, for example, if you take the case of pest infestation or something other like drought is there, heat stress is there. So already some we should not assume that the current level of adaptation is 0. So already some stress, heat stress tolerant varieties are there, or lodging resistant varieties are there, or submergence tolerant varieties are there in rice. So means in certain regions they already are geared up and to certain level of adaptation capacities were built up. So if the impact will be different per a given magnitude of stress, impact will be different in different parts of that study region. So that we should not assume that we are assuming that it is equal for all parts. So that is first point. My first point. Got my point?
So can I respond to the first point? So that's why we have these categories. So if you already have an inbuilt resistance in certain varieties to high temperature, then that will increase when it happens. It has no yield impact. So it's this category. So this is accounting for the fact that not all rice, even when pest infestation occurs, not all of the rice in dry season will be impacted by that. So we are capturing both occurrence and impact together.
And this percent area is, for example, first one drought rice we are taking 50% of rice area or 50% of this is 50% of total rice area in the zone.
So as we said, it's 50% of the rice planted in dry season.
Okay. Regarding, but still, what I feel is the second module cannot be completely pre-populated. Impacts will be varying. That we have to take some inputs from the stakeholders workshop, and there should be some provision for that. That's what we are telling is we don't have the complete information, and field level knowledge is very much required. One is adaptation options, that is anyway module 3, that also, and even for second module also, it should not be completely pre-populated. Up to probability of occurrence of a particular hazard, it is true, because we have data sets, government data sets, even climate data sets. So and then statistics for module 1, area, production, yield, all those things. For second module, we have the data of daily scale data on different climatic parameters. We can generate what is the probability of occurrence of a particular event, but impacts part should not be completely from our side, pre-population. It should be some inputs of the stakeholder must be taken into a consideration. Is region to region, some certain level of adaptation is there. If you miss that outputs, and if you do, there will be a lot of issues will be there. Even from literature also, it won't get much information on particular study region. We'll be getting some literature how the particular hazard of a particular magnitude will impact to this extent. That is there. But region to region, lot of within the region also it varies. It varies.
Definitely. Thank you, Raju. So there's a lot to unpack there. The first one is, do we have the ability to pre-populate this with good quality data? And the answer to that is probably no, but I will put an asterisk on that and say that one of the people in the global team is Pete Stewart, I think is his name. I talked to him the other day, and he's developing a climate atlas for Africa, and I think it's sub-Saharan Africa. It might be able to do Egypt and Morocco, but where it specifically looks at quantifying the climate risks in sub-Saharan Africa. So there's going to be some support there for the Africa locations. And I'm not sure about Morocco and Egypt, but there's a conversation going. And actually, there was an email sent this morning linking the process technical and regional facilitators to Pete for Sawana already. For Asia, it's a different story. There's not a climate atlas or similar that can be used here. So I hear what you're saying and I agree. The only constraint that I would say here is nobody wants to go to a 10-hour workshop. So we have to think about how much we can fit into a one-day workshop here. If you think as facilitators that you can potentially pre-populate this, but put it up at the start of the workshop and work through it and get them to identify the numbers, you know, as a collective that are wrong, then there's nothing wrong with that. I would suggest to pre-populate, but then you can show at the start of the workshop and say, here is the work that we have done previously. Do you believe that there is some numbers that we should change here before we go into the workshop? But if you're going to populate this with the workshop, it's going to add at least an hour, I would say, to the length of your workshop. So it's really about, as process and technical facilitators, how much you think you can fit into one workshop. Samar.
I don't have a question. I just want to be sure that I get it in the right way. My understanding for the probability of occurrence in this table is all about the resilience of the production system of this certain crop. Is it correct, or it's based on, it should be filled based on the adaptation, available adaptation option? It's about resilience or the adaptation. This is the first point.
So module 2 has nothing to do with adaptation. So put adaptation all the way to module 3. Module 2 is about the system as it is and how it will survive in the next 10 years. So it's very much about the current level of resilience to these climate hazards. Does that answer the question?
Yes, this is great. My second comment is about, as Raju mentioned, this estimation of the probability should be based on the literature review or just an expert judgment from the, for example, technical working group or the participants in workshop. Because we already hear in an Egypt case, we have many literature talking about the impact of climate change or the vulnerability of the production system of different crops. So should we just base on these studies or also mix it with the experts that they were involved in the meeting?
And I think this follows on from Raju's question there around how do we go about populating this? And again, I would say, if you have a good source of data, then it's much better to use that good source of data to pre-populate, and it makes the workshop a lot tighter. However, there are going to be locations and regions where there is not good data for this. And if that's the case, it will mean that you will have to engage more with expert opinion or with your workshop to make sure that you can populate through this. So the best way to go about this would be literature review and hard data. However, it's not going to exist in lots of locations, so you have to revert to the next level, and that is expert elicitation. And you could do that with your internal, maybe at your CG center or within your government department, to pre-populate. Or the next level then would be to go to your workshop and say, we need an extra hour or hour and a half in this workshop to make sure that we populate these climate hazards correctly. What I would say though, if you're going to populate this with your workshop, you'd want to be quite hard in your filter. So as you can see, if you've got 2 yes selected, then you've only got to do this module twice. If you've got 8 selected, then you've got to do all 8. So if you think that you'll need to do this within your workshop and you don't have good data, then I would suggest don't select all 8 of the crop season combinations, because you simply won't have time to run the workshop otherwise. Munza.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, Sama.
No,
sorry,
just
Munza,
final comment about the sub-Saharan atlas. Actually, the climate system in North Africa, especially in Egypt and Morocco, I think it's a little bit different from sub-Saharan. I'm not sure if we can get used from this atlas or not, but we already have some estimations about the climate impacts in Egypt. So I think we can just base on this in the local observation much better. Thank you very much.
Yeah, so the climate atlas is zoned, so it's not that it's all just like a Southern Africa. I believe that it goes down to at least a provincial, if not lower than provincial level, and that's why it's not clear to me if North Africa is in that atlas or not. But we'll follow up that directly with Pete, and he'll be able to tell us clearly if that's the case or not. Munza.
Yeah, Brendan, I was just wondering, as a workaround to this issue, if we can circulate our pre-populated module 1 and 2 sheets with the participants beforehand to ask for feedback, and if there are any critical issues that they identify that we can address, so that prevents us from needing to re-engage with the participants on module 1 and 2 and let them know that this needs to be pre-populated for the workshop to run smoothly. And so if anyone has any issues, sort of speak now, forever hold your truth. Would that work in this situation?
It wouldn't be a problem. I can make a printable template or an emailable PDF out of the data that's much more presentable than this. So that's not a problem. But to also just hit on what Ajit has said in the chat around stakeholder consensus, there's also the risk that, let's say, I worked at CIMMIT, so let's use my experience at CIMMIT as an example. I get emailed something beforehand, and I think that it underplays maize and wheat because it's sent to me by an EiA person and it says it's 90% rice and 5% wheat, or wheat comes out not important, and then I get offended and then say, I'm not going to this workshop or anything like that. So there's also like a fine line here. So again, I think it comes back to, if we've got good data for this, then I'd suggest pre-populating and starting the workshop with the pre-population. If we think that there is things that we cannot answer with the data, then we have to go to that next level. I think your idea of sending something in advance is a good idea, and we can make a PDF template. But what you would have to be ready for as process facilitators particularly is what happens when 7 people send back that they're happy with the numbers and 1 person sends back that they're very angry about the numbers. So then you've got to manage that relationship there as well and say, we obviously, we've got to find consensus, and it's just a bit of people management. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, that's fair enough. Thanks.
So I still believe that as conceptually also, when we are finally prioritizing the climatic hazards, we see a multiplicator model. We have to take up a multiplicator model like the probability of occurrence of a particular hazard multiplied with impact of yield penalty if that occurs of that magnitude, multiplied with how much area just for aggregation purpose. That is the conceptually right model you have adopted in previous version of this tool. These three aspects are must, but now you have merged these two aspects like the probability of occurrence and impact if it occurs. So that's I think for the Indian context anyway, and up to this we can generate to some extent probability of occurrence from data sets, government source data sets. But impact it should be from, we are not getting enough literature. The impacts of different parts of the study. Provision should be made for that impact one module, one sheet.
You're dropping it in and out. Sorry, Raju, with your connection. I'm not sure I quite captured it. So if we haven't addressed it, maybe type it in the chat. But just to clarify, this is capturing both occurrence and spread of impact in this. But yeah, if you can type into the chat the clarification, and we can discuss that a little more. So while we're waiting for Raju to put that in the chat, just because his internet's dropping in and out, we'll go through and look at what we get. So zooming in. So the results are split in two ways. The first is the impact of the different climate challenges. So you'll see that this is 3-factor. So this is hazard, crop, season. So this is the third level where we aggregate up as we move across here. So in this case, it's saying that the biggest economic impact is going in the Mekong Delta of Cambodia, remembering that this is junk data, is drought on rice in the dry season, followed by high temperature on rice in the dry season. Now that's reflecting that rice in the dry season is the major crop and it's the economic driver. So it all links back to module 1 and module 2, what's put in. And the figure is just trying to give some proportionality to this. So we can see that probably about 33% of the entire economic impact that the model is throwing out is that drought in dry season rice. As we move to the right, it aggregates up. So this is adaptation, challenge, and season. So what we see then is the aggregations that come. So again, rice and drought, because we see drought on rice here and drought on rice here, when we aggregate that up, that becomes the most important crop challenge combination. And then it's aggregated to a single level, being that drought is the most important. Now, what you're seeing here is a little bit simple because there's not a lot of crops in there and there's not a lot of seasons. So the lists become longer if you've got more crops and more seasons in your analysis. This is simplified down because we've only looked at those two, rice in the dry season, rice in the wet season. So if we had included the others, then the list would be more complex and the aggregations would be more meaningful. Likewise, when we come over to the vulnerabilities, this is not a very interesting aggregation because we've only considered one crop here. So when we go to the filter, we only considered rice in the dry season and rice in the wet season. The more crops that you have, the more interesting this vulnerabilities assessment will come in as. Rika, I can see your hand up.
Brendan, a more technical question on this. I see that on your file, you're able to see the results, but at my end, I'm not. And it does tell me that there are some links that did not work, and I tried to update values, but it still does not work at my end. So I'm not sure whether there's a workaround for that or I did something wrong.
There's two possibilities. One is that I've pasted some code that has accidentally linked to a different spreadsheet. And the second one is that it's your computer. So anybody that I sent an updated version to about half an hour before the workshop, have you opened that file and did it work? Can you see this on your computer? Can anybody of the people that I sent files to check for me? Okay, so it may be that I've got a secret hidden link when I've pasted some code. So what I will do is find that, and it's an easy fix. But then Samar's saying it works for her. I often find that EiA's systems are less compatible because you're on the Google ecosystem and not the Microsoft ecosystem. But
yes, Brandon, every time I receive files, I have to go open it in the properties and enable the macros. And so maybe that's creating a problem.
It was a problem I had when I was at CIMIT, and I was collaborating with EiA colleagues as well, is that the macros often were a problem. If Samar is saying it's working well for her, I will still try and find if there is any links that might be causing that. If not, yeah, it is this Microsoft universe versus the Google universe, and EiA being on the Google one. Yeah, so I'm not sure I have a solution other than borrowing a different CG laptop that's on the Microsoft system. But leave that one with me, and I will see if I can find a workaround for that. But
I'll also connect. I'll send an email then to our IT and to you, and maybe we can discuss together on that.
Yeah, that will work. But if anybody is having problems with the file, so I know Samar has raised that it was not crashing, but it was slowing down for her. I'm also trying to get rid of all the lazy coding that I made in the first version. So if you're seeing sometimes it'll slow down, I'm trying to get rid of that. And that's also what we talked about at the very start, where I'm going to split module 1 and 2 file from module 3 file so that it's not trying to calculate through the entire tool. So yeah, when you receive module 3, that's why I'm saying I need to receive a modules P1 and 2 from you before I can give you the module 3 file, because they're separate files. So I hope that makes sense. As a side note to yeah, what we're talking about there with Rika. All right, so these are what you get, and this is essentially the end point of pre-population. We've gone through, we've characterized the system, we've looked at the likely impacts of climate change, and we've got to this point that says that these are the big impacts and these are the vulnerabilities in the current system. Going back to what we said before, module 3 is then about what are we going to do? So if we identify in this example that drought on rice in the dry season is our biggest climate hazard or climate challenge, we have to then think, what are our adaptation options? So that's what module 3 then goes to. I just want to go back and find Raju's comment if he's put it in there. 1 second. Impact submodule to take inputs. Okay, so it sounds like in India you might need more engagement with stakeholders than, say, if in some of the sub-Saharan African locations where there's a climate atlas that will help. So that's fine. Yeah. So where we are at then is that we get to the end here. We get our impacts and our vulnerabilities. The next parts that you might not have seen in them where you've got to so far, the first one is just an introductory page. So really this is something that you'd probably have up on the projector when you, when everybody's walking in or anything. It's just like a landing page that's just about what is PAiCE. Some of this is actually, we'll put in the invitation letter as well, but it's just describing what PAiCE is, where it's come from, who's funded it, what modules are there, etc. So that's the landing page, which is W1. What we then get is this summary. And what this is just telling the workshop how we got to where we got to. So this is applicable for those that will pre-populate before the workshop. So it says, you know, we analyzed this many crops, this many seasons. This was the value of production in billion US dollars. And then in module 2, we looked at 5 climate hazards. We looked at 3 crop season combinations, and we got the likely economic loss or the economic impact of these different challenges. So it's basically just the summary of what's come out of module 1 and 2 that will be used in the analysis of module 3. And then we're at the start of the workshop. So a couple points here. So I can see that in some of the information that's been sent to me, you might have 25, 30 participants in a workshop. The idea is that you can't run this tool with 25 people around a projector. What we want is to see, so say if you've got 25 people, you'd want to split into 5 groups of 5, or 4 groups of 7. But you want to have groups of between 4 and 7 to make sure that everybody gets a chance to contribute. And it's also that what my role is you get to the end of the workshop. So you've got 4 separate files that have been run in this example, and you send all 4 to me, and I'll put them together and look at similarities, differences. You know, was there a consensus? Even though the 4 workshop tables were working independent of each other, was there commonalities? Was there differences that came through? So you can't run this on a projector with 25 people in a room. It's just not what this is designed to do. You have to split into these smaller groups. So what this is then doing is setting the number of people, and it's just noting the name, the organization, the email. For those of you that are concerned about ethical clearances, so I've run this through the CSIRO Ethics Review Board, and it's got ethics clearance. I have a sheet that will be printed out that you can provide to participants, but there's a summary of, you know, whenever you do surveys and the ethics that you have to follow, there's information there around ethics and consent. So this is covered through the CSIRO Ethics Review Panel. And so this is then the start of module 3, which I'm not going to go too in depth to today, but I wanted to stop, again, pause. Did people have questions around what we've got in this W1, which is the landing page, W2, which is the pre-fill summary, and W3, which is the ethics and just noting who's in the workshop? Yes, Rika.
So Brendan, with respect to the different groups, as they're basically independently discussing, right? What if some of these groups change some of the pre-populated things because they feel like, oh, that's not true? So are we allowing that, or then do we have to synchronize to all the groups? How does that work?
Excellent question. Very valid point. So no. When you start with W1, everything before that has to be the same for each of your groups. So you can't let one table go back and change the importance of wheat. You have to have it synchronized. And so when people start at module 3, each table has the same data and the same file. Yeah, great question though. So that is a further complication if you're going to fiddle with things. If you decide that you want to do modules 1 and 2 with the group, what I will do is for those specific facilitators, I will just show you how you transfer between the 2 files. It's not complex at all. It's just a copy and paste system with a few little intricacies in there. But yes, at the point where you are at this screen at W1, this submodule, each of the tables would have exactly the same file. Other questions on these? So W is just welcome. So welcome 1, welcome 2, and welcome 3 modules.
Brendan, I was just wondering, and I don't know if this is sort of probably getting ahead of ourselves. But wondering if we can see a template of, what the actual final output would look like, just so that, we can think of what are some of the things we need to fix in the process of getting there, or what we need to do from our end to make sure that, we're doing it right. I don't know if, even if it's just sort of with dummy numbers or something, just for our own knowledge. And I'm sorry if that's already been shared, but it would be nice to see, what we are kind of working towards.
No, great question and great point. So that will come most likely Friday. The problem that I have is that I'm getting rid of all my lazy coding as I am teaching this as well. So I'll show you some of it, but it actually, some of the links have broken as I've been coding. But I can share something from the earlier workshops or the pilot workshops, but the output looks a bit different. But essentially, what you will get on Friday as part of the third module training, the videos that will come and the files that will come, is a blank template for you to fill, an example template with the final output that comes as well. Again, on the provision that you send me a finalized modules P1 and 2 so that I can transfer that for you. So you are 2 days away from seeing that, Monza.
Okay, thanks.
Other questions that people have with these pages? Okay, so what I can do then is I'll just give you a very quick overview of module 3. Where are we? All right. So, sorry, module 3. So this is the landing page of module 3. So this is what we're trying to do in the workshop. So the time requirement is around that 6 hours, give or take, because there's quite a lot to do when you talk about adaptation options. So this is when we said if you want to do module 2 with the group, you've really got to allocate quite a long day. I certainly wouldn't be starting a workshop at 10 and thinking that you're finished by 4 if you have to go through module 2 with the workshop as well. What are we trying to do? We've said that we've identified the climate hazards and challenges for the system. Now we have to do something about that. We've got to adapt to it. We've got to look at the different potential options that we have. And what we get at the end is this prioritization that says that economically, these are the best options, but then you've got to factor in these other elements as well. What does that look like? So, and I'm going to go very quickly through this because this is part of next week's training, but just to give you an idea. What we have is these key climate hazards over here, and we're asking across these different categories, sorry, I'll zoom in a bit more, cultivars, cropping calendar, water management. So these are the EiA relevant agronomic categories, and we're saying how many adaptation options do you think relate to these key climate hazards across here, and then name them. So this is just, blanked out at the moment. I've just said 3 for everything, and these numbers would be options. So one, resilient cultivars, number 1 might actually be, wheat, a specific cultivar of wheat that is drought tolerant, or you might have early planting of rice in the crop calendar, or you might have, direct seeding rice somewhere or anything. So you basically create a long list of up to 30 adaptation options that are relevant to the adaptation, to the challenges. This will look different by the time it comes to you. It's too busy at the moment when it comes to you on Friday. The idea is that you've got a long list of 30. You cannot possibly assess 30 options in 6 hours, so you've got to get it down to 10. So this is the big discussion point. So this probably takes you through to morning tea, where you've got a long list. Everybody's going to have their pet things, and you've got to get it as facilitators. You've got to get it down to 10, a maximum of 10. You can do less, but a maximum of 10. So you've got to include them, exclude them, and say why. Or sometimes you might merge them as a bundle. So it might be a cultivar and direct seeded rice. that come together as a bundle. So you'll get a list then of 10, and then you'll see 3.3 through 3.12 are analysis of those 10. And again, I was just trying to get rid of some code before, but the idea is at the top, you're looking at the impact on yield when you do a particular adaptation option, and then you'll have these other elements, so around co-benefits, so sustainability, mitigation, time frame, adoptability, extension ready, the evidence base, the likelihood that government will integrate these, the community belief, all of these things that will come in. And there's no point in me showing you the results because I broke the code just before. But what you basically get at the end is a list that says that economically these are your best bet adaptation options, but they are in different categories. So some are still in a research phase, some are in a extension mode where you need to change awareness rate, some are in a further development mode where it's not ready, it's not actually suiting farmer needs, etc., etc. So what I'll say is that the next steps that we have here is by Friday, this is going to, a training package for Module 3 is going to come out with those templates. And then you can work through it, have a play, see the results. And then next Wednesday, we will meet again to discuss all things Module 3. And I suggest that there's going to be a lot of discussion here because this, for facilitators, this is really what you're doing in the workshop. So you want to be really clear about the different questions, the different categories, the different options. Also, when you're playing with this and you're looking at categorical responses, think, is every possible categorical response that I might use in this workshop there? Do I understand each of these as well? So in terms of making sure that you understand the tool as facilitators, this next week of training is the most important. So please send things back to me as people have been doing, but also come armed next week, next Wednesday, with lots of questions, suggestions, and improvements to make sure that we build that in. From there, we've got the Wednesday after, we're not training because I am on duty travel, so I won't be able to connect. And then the Wednesday after, so 3 Wednesdays time, we've got Pete and Jordan who are helping with data support and hopefully the regional leads all meeting together with everybody here to talk about actual implementation, final issues, everything that we need to do to be ready to implement these workshops, because I know a lot of you are thinking about implementing these as soon as the first week of September. So that's the timeline that we're coming through here. Otherwise, for Asia and for Siwana, there was emails this morning with process and technical facilitators and regional leads and Pete to try and look at what data support is needed and also to finalize the geographic locations. So process facilitators and regional leads need to work together and have a P4 and P5 completely settled, because this will need to go in the invitations that go out to workshop participants as well. So for Egypt and Morocco, we already have a P4 and P5 sorted in the Nile Basin in that central Morocco region. For all of the other regions, I really need process and technical facilitators to work with your regional leads and to finalize P4 and P5 for each of those locations. So I know Southeast Asia, you've nominated your area, and for South Asia, you've nominated Bihar and Eastern UP. What you need now to do is to, with the file that was sent, to finalize P4 and P5 so that if you want data support, we know the exact production domain that you're talking about. So push your regional leads. I know that they can be hard to grab, but push them to make sure that that's finalized. I did receive about an hour ago an email from Wulatau for the West Africa. So we're on the right path there. But if you're in the southern, eastern and southern group, really push Testify to get the workshop locations and production domains sorted. Is there any further questions that people would like to ask now? You're coming towards the end.
Brandon, it's Vijay.
Yes.
Actually, it's a suggestion. Actually, even in text, chat box, I saw Ajit also texted the same thing. When we speak about drought, flood, all these, technically speaking, all these classified as a weather hazards, not as a climatic hazards. So we can change the words if you wish, climate hazards into weather hazards. Yeah.
I hear what you're saying. The idea here is that it's the additional changes in climate that in weather that are caused by climate change. So they are actually climate hazards because they are additional expectations on the normal weather pattern. So they are weather events, but they are climate induced hazards. But what I can do, the language that is being used at the moment is related to the language of EiA. So I can go back to the heads at EiA and clarify exactly what they would like to use there. But at the moment, the wording is reflective of the EiA logic. So leave that one with me. I hear what you're saying, and I'll follow that up. Musa, you've got your hand up.
Thanks, Brendan. Thank you for this training. I know we are really behind, so apologies. We haven't really shared our Excel for module 1. But do you mind resharing it, because I seem to not be able to find it on my email? You mean, I remember from the last session you said you are going to have another final version. I don't know then if myself and Dieudonné can have access to the latest one that we can definitely fill before end of this week.
Definitely, and my apologies that we have had a few different versions. As I said, because I'm madly trying to code this because we're on time deadlines now, I'm occasionally making a slip in the code. So it's my fault as well, and I apologize for that. The email that I will send out now, and hopefully from the WhatsApp group, I've got everybody now on the email, will be the file that you will like, the most up-to-date file. So disregard any previous files while this next email that comes. What I will also do is I can put a link in the WhatsApp as well for a download, but make sure you download a separate version and don't use that, because everybody will come to that point. But yes, I will send that, and apologies for the multiple versions.
No worries. So my other suggestion maybe, and this is for all of us here, and even for Brown, who is really helping us, is, I mean, I have a bit of experience when we were doing integrating weather and climate analytics into agricultural risk management with SIAT in Rwanda. We had some sort of ways workshops are being set up, because we would have people who are not necessarily comfortable in English during the workshop. So we had some sort of PowerPoint that had all the steps written like in details, and then you would have other formats that people would then fill with stickers and everything, like a Word document. And I was wondering then if this might not be one of the key things maybe you guys can look into, so that when we'll be doing workshops, instead of just people focusing on an Excel, that will be in English with few people who have been trained, I mean the facilitator and the technical person, then having some sort of ways that it will be interactive in such a way that people really collect as many information as possible.
Definitely, great suggestion, and it's certainly possible. And yes, it should not just be sitting around a laptop only, but if it's going to go all day, that will be difficult for people. The other thing that I just want to remind everybody about is that it is set up. The tool can be multilingual. So it was set up a previous version in Spanish. It's right now not functional in Spanish, but I don't think none of us are from Spanish regions. The way that it works is that it all comes back to a translation page, which is hidden. So what you'll see is that English is here. Everything that you see is linked to this column. If you want to add a language, and I know that there was some interest expressed in last week for an Arabic version and for potentially a French version. There's a few ways that you can do it. As we said, we're splitting modules P1 and 2 from module 3. If you don't intend to run P1 and 2 with your workshop beforehand, it'll be much less work just to translate module 3 into a different language. The tool is already set up functionally to do that. With a note that because Arabic goes the other way, we might have to play a little bit with other alphabets, but in theory, it is set up. It would certainly work very easily with French. We would just create a French column, and when you're in here, you would select French, just as I do with Spanish, and you can see that everything updates to the new language. So the functionality is there. It's just somebody needs to do the translation to make that work. And you'll need to decide if you want to do the whole tool or if you just want to do that module 3 as well. For the people that express interest in that, send me an email directly. Don't just put in the chat. And when you do, you need to tell me which modules, which language, and who you're going to nominate to do the translation. But it's set up and ready to be multilingual.
I mean, thanks, Bran. Yeah, maybe this is something we can talk offline, because I know in Rwanda we were also hoping to also work with Burundi, and Burundi is a French country. So we definitely need French as far as Central Africa is concerned. Yeah, I will follow up with an email and copy my colleagues here from CGR in Rwanda. Thank you.
Perfect. What we'll say now, we had the 2 hours, we're at an hour and a half. I realize that's already very long. So if you don't have any further questions or anything to discuss, feel free to drop off. If you have anything else to discuss with me, then I'll stay on the line. But thank you, everybody. You can expect the training to come through on Friday for module 3, and you'll get the files through. I will send out, after this call now, I will send out the most recent file for P1 and 2. And again, that needs to be returned to me before I can give you module 3. Otherwise, thank you, everybody. As always, thanks for engaging. Thanks for suggesting. And I will see you on Wednesday next week. If you've got more questions, stay on the line. I'm happy to answer them. But otherwise, thank you and bye-bye.
Thanks,
See you, Brent.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Brendan, if you're still there, it's Rika. Just a thought on this, because I sense like where the partners will push where am I? I'm in 2.4, for example, on the percentage, like this is likelihood of each of the outcomes to occur for that particular season over the next X years. And we start with the area impacted, right? And they're going to think, okay, out of that area, let's say for drought, the areas close to the rivers, etc., will not be affected. And they will think about that, and they will start to think more in geographic terms for the rest of these percentages. How do we correct that and make sure that we clarify to them that this is not the geographic scope is there. This is likelihood of this particular impact happening.
So we're related here. So I put it up on the screen. So is this in relation to part I or II?
This is in relation to, sorry, which part were you talking about?
You said you're in module 2.4, but you're talking
Yes.
about, yeah?
Yes, that's right. I mean on this page, exactly.
So we could do another hectare calculator for some of this if you wanted, for particularly for part I, because that is hectare related in that highlands are less affected by flood than lowlands, for instance, or
Right.
so this is still hectare related. This
Yeah, but which is the column E, right? The one in column E, that's okay. That's geographic. But once we get to K, L, M, and N, these are not related to the area and as much. I mean, the percentage there is not about percentage of the area. So how do we, I just want to clarify, like, how do we correct them in their thinking that, you know, this is not, once we started with the 50% of the area, that's done. And now we're looking at likelihood that an effect is like this.
One of the things I was thinking about, Rika, is because it's a 10-year period, I don't like the idea of using a percent here. We could move it so that is a year. So, you know, instead of 25%, instead of 50%, the answer is 5 out of 10 years. Do you think that because we move away from percentage and it's actually in years, would that help mentally clarify that about it? Yeah,
I would agree. I would agree. That it's like it shifts the brain completely out of what was already right considered. The area we already know that this X% is affected, and now we just need a different, like a nuance to that, and it has nothing. It's not directly related to the area. All these percentages. So if we ask them for something else, it might help. So yeah, that would be good.
Yeah, so I think that logically will help mentally separate the two and get away from, sometimes we all, for the social scientists, it's percentages are a bit harder. But Samar, you had a different opinion?
If we just replace or change the percentage to the number of the year of the likelihood, it may be difficult for the expert and for the studies to understand or to estimate the impact. Because, for example, we have an irrigated system, and when we put the number of the years, we are more targeting or mentioning the variability of the occurrence, which is not represented well in our studies. The impact in percentage will be more meaningful in our case.
But it's the same number that we're talking about it, because it's 25% of 10 years or 50% of 10 years. So it's just the fact that it's not in percentage terms, that it's in year terms. So the data would be the same. In theory, the source would be the same that you're using. It's a presentation metric rather than the actual type of data that's there.
Well, I understand it in different way. That is, it's not the percentage, how many years years that this impact will be occurred. I understand it. What is the magnitude of the occurrence during the 1 year after this 10 years? This is my understanding for this percentage or for this sheet. I'm not getting it right.
I need to change the text here, because it's also, when I look at this again now, and the problem is I've looked at this so much that in my mind I have a different understanding now. But what this is, this part 2 here is also not about field level. So it's saying that of the entire yield that comes in a particular year. So in this case, rice in wet season, let's say that 30 million tons can be expected in a normal year. What it's saying then is that flooding in, so flooding would not cause any change in that expected 30 million tonnes in 2.5 of the 10 years. So really, we should go to years. Let's just say 3 of the 10 years. So in 3 of 10 years, flooding is not going to cause us damage to our 30 million tonnes of rice. In 5 of the 10 years, instead of getting 30 million, flood will cause us to get 26 million tonnes. In 1 of the 10 years, instead of getting 30 million, floods will be impactful and will only get 15 million. And in around 1 of those 10 years, flood is going to absolutely wipe out our rice wet season yield, and instead of getting 30 million, we're only going to get 3 million. So that's what this is trying to capture. But I can understand looking at that question again.
No, I understand it for the particular year that if we are going to have, for example, 1 million ton of this crop, we are going to have to lose, for example, 15% from this due to extreme or catastrophic yield impact. Or we don't have any impact in 25% of the yield. This is what was my understanding for this. But if you are going to mention the number of the years that will have this impact, I think it will be a little bit difficult to estimate it.
And that's the point. There's not going to be necessarily good data to do this. But that's what we're trying to do here, is we're trying to quantify the vulnerability to these impacts. So a crop that has a lot of area that may be impacted and that has a likelihood of these catastrophic years means that we need greater adaptation options, which we may not have as well. So that's what we're trying to get to this tool. So what I will do then is I will reword this second module to make it much clearer as to what we're actually asking there. Gizachu, salamnu, denane. You're still muted if you're speaking.
Sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much for all the detailed explanation. And then something clicks my mind when you are talking now about this table and the estimations of the year or the impact of over the 10 years. How can we forecast what is going to happen for the next 10 years? Or are we going to depend on some information or pre-information? Or do you guys have some information at hand so that we can use them to forecast what will happen for the next 10 years? Because it's a long time and then no one can perfectly guess what is going to happen the next 10 years. Thank you.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the challenge that we face with any climate change research, is that we cannot know the future. But there is a few resources. So particularly for your case, for Eastern and Southern Africa and the Horn, that climate atlas will be a useful resource. So once TESFI and yourself can put together the location for each of these workshops that are occurring in Eastern and Southern Africa, we will link you with Pete, who has made this climate atlas, and you'll be able to get this information from that climate atlas through Pete. So for the sub-Saharan African locations, you'll have some support for this.
That will be very good. I will talk to TESFI and then we'll sit together and then discuss. So it means that every of the module 1 and 2 has to be pre-populated based on some information and support from the international team or the global team, or maybe you yourself?
Not me, but there will be support at least for the sub-Saharan African locations. And I'm still unclear about North Africa. But there will be definite support for sub-Saharan Africa. In Asia, there is no climate atlas to my knowledge, so it will be more on those teams to populate that. But you will definitely get some support for Eastern and Southern Africa.
So I hope you have got my email and then some of the examples I've tried. So it means that I have to talk with to Tasfai and we have to sit together and then fill it properly, the P4, P5, and some of the pre-informations and then send you back.
Exactly. We absolutely need P4 and P5 for each workshop so that we can get that support for you guys with the data support.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much.
Other questions to discuss? Yes, Raju.
P4, P5 means that is the initial pre-populated that pages like before module 1. Is that one? Geographical area, land use classification, ninefold. These are the pages you are referring? P4, P5?
Yeah, so for Bihar and Eastern UP, what we need is P4 and P5 agreed with Verinder so that we can lock that in, we can organize everything, and you guys will not have as much support. But I know that if I understand correctly, in India, you guys have hired a intern or somebody to help you with this, right?
Yes, we have hired some 2 consultants for working on the
Exactly.
with data
Yeah.
processing and all generating.
Yeah.
So some data sets we have generated regarding based on historical data sets, like we have some government data sets at district at grid level data sets are there, like off degree by off degree, 1 degree by 1 degree, temperature and all. So from those data sets from different administrative units, district we are considering, and we are generated these weather data or climate data on daily scale for district level. From those data sets, we are deriving like extreme rainfall events, unseasonal rains, or drought, flood, cyclone, all those things. So from that, that is okay. Means based on historical data, probability of occurrence of a particular hazard, climatic hazard. So on a 0 to 10 scale or 0 to 100 scale, if you call it as a percentage, that the part we are comfortable. But regarding its impacts of for a given stress of a given magnitude, given climatic hazard of a given magnitude occurs, what kind of yield penalty will be there in the region. For that, we are trying to get something from the literature, but for the study region. But the literature, what we have on the study region is very meager, and the way we are requiring, like severe drought or moderate drought, so that way we are looking at that kind of information is not available. So for that reason only, I'm asking that if some submodule is there. So because in a given study region also, somewhere irrigation is there, some districts. So those districts, even if drought occurs, so they manage the drought with the giving that irrigation, and that drought can be impact of drought can be moderated. But some parts of that region not means irrigation is not there for the crop. Those parts will get affected with the drought is there. So that's why
Exactly.
though
So
that's the
purpose of this first bit is drought will be lower because the irrigated lands will not be impacted heavily by that. So this is the filter to capture issues like that. But I agree that there is not going to be good data and we cannot know the future. So this is the space that we're working in climate adaptation. So we can only do the best, and if we can't get that data, then we need to defer to experts or our workshops to do that.
actually that no impact part is that, for example, you are telling out of, we are considering, for example, moderate drought. How many more out of 100 years, next coming 100 years, how many will be having drought? So based on a particular region, probability of occurrence is, let us say, normal year. It is a 50% of the years are normal years, and then some, let us say, 20% years are severe drought years. Some 30% are, let us say, moderate drought years. So that 150 years are means at 50% probability that it's a normal year. So there no yield impact will put that 50. That is okay. But again, with moderate drought and severe drought, we have to bring out, and the sensitivity of the same crop will vary from one district to another district for even for a given stress magnitude, like moderate drought. So then that to account for that it is required. So at least we want to elicit some responses from the stakeholders not very detailed. Some whatever earlier module you have taken. So these three together, like area, which are vulnerable, and then probability of occurrence of hazard, and that level of magnitude it occurs. So in which district the magnitude impact is like this. So different. We are conducting this. Like in Eastern UP is different state, and Bihar is a different state. So the responses will be the sensitivity of the same crop will be different in these two states. So that we want to account for to get better precision in the outputs.
You may want to split. You can have the workshop on the same day, but we talked about having, say, 5 tables in a room. You might want 2 tables that are Eastern UP and 3 tables that are Bihar, for instance. You don't need to mix Bihar and UP together. You can run them separate, but when they come back to me, I will give you a clearer picture of when we aggregate up.
Aggregate picture of the whole region.
Yeah, so my place here is to build the tool, to make sure you guys can use the tool. You guys go off and use it. You send them back to me, and I aggregate up. So I can aggregate up and do a report for Eastern IGP in your case. But then there's also the an Asia report and then a global report where we aggregate up. So we want to give something for you guys at your level, but then we want to aggregate up so we can create something powerful for the global level as well. So that's where we're headed. But again, in the meeting, the final meeting, that's where we want you to discuss, with Verinda, for instance, as that regional lead for South Asia. When we do this workshop, how many people are coming? How many tables are from this location? How many are from that location? In that case, you would have 2 different files with 2 different populated pre-population. You'd have the Eastern UP file and you'd have the Bihar file. But we'll come to that when we go to the implementation workshop. So maybe we can park that for that discussion.
Okay, fine.
Perfect.
Okay.
Any other questions? Thank you for everybody. I'm happy to take them, but understand other people might want to go. But in any case, always email me or send me something on WhatsApp if you're having problems, and we'll work through it. But thank you, everybody, for attending, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, Brandon. Bye.
Bye, everybody.